You're watching Salina Media Connection. Lindsey Behgam, Voter Engagement Director for the Mainstream Education Foundation, gave a presentation November 18, 2019 on voter engagement during the Intersections of Faith and Health Conference. The conference was hosted by the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund. The following program lasts about an hour.
Good afternoon, good morning everyone. I just wanted to thank you all for coming, but also just introduce Lindsey briefly, and then turn things over. Lindsey Behgam is leading the voter-to-voter work, which is really important work to try to increase voter participation. They build teams within, and she'll talk much more in depth, build teams within congregations, within businesses, within communities, and it's really exciting work. As we look at ways that the health funds help build healthier communities, there's important studies that show that more engaged communities that vote at a higher level have better health. And I think that's why it's exciting, because there really is a connection between health and voting. And we've been talking with Lindsey and her colleagues at the Mainstream Coalition for a number of years about the important work they do. So we've had the benefit of partnering with Mainstream in different ways and in prior lives, and they do amazing work. So I'll turn things over to Lindsey, and she's the real expert, but I think we're in for a treat.
Lindsey Behgam. My computer goes dark fast. I probably should have changed the settings on that, so sorry, I'm always touching my computer. But I will tell you a little bit about myself and this session that we're going to do. And if you have questions while we're going through it, I'm pretty informal about these things, so if you cut me off, I won't be upset about that. We heard Justin talk about intentional engagement. In his presentation this morning, I want to talk to you about intentional engagement as it relates to talking to people about voting and that relationship to health. My background is in political campaigns. I grew up in Olathe. I raised United Methodist Church, by the way. But I have been working on political campaigns for a number of years, and that's where I started. So I was in Wichita, and I covered South Central Kansas when Governor Kathleen Sebelius was up for re-election in 2006. I managed the last congressional race that Dennis Moore ran in 2008 up in the Kansas City area. I worked for the state treasurer after that, Dennis McKinney from Greensburg, a Methodist. There's a trend here, I think. And tried to do corporate work for a little bit and got sucked back in, went to work for the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County, Mark Cullen, who is a Methodist pastor. And I was there for about 5 years, and then about a year and a half ago came to work for the Mainstream Coalition. The Mainstream Coalition was formed in 1994. It was a sitting Republican legislator, a sitting Democratic legislator, a pastor, and a rabbi, so like the beginning of a joke, pretty much. And they originally came together around the issue of separation of church and state, and to battle kind of extreme opinions and the extreme voice in our Kansas politics. And so they were formed, I said, in 1994, have been mostly doing work in Johnson County, Kansas, although have expanded into Wyandotte County, Kansas, and in the last couple of years have rolled out some tools that work statewide, including the project that I'm working on. They actually have 3 entities. So the Mainstream Coalition is a C4 advocacy organization, so they can advocate for or against particular candidates and issues. They have a political action committee that makes endorsements. I actually live in the C3 side, which is all nonpartisan. So my project will never support one candidate over another or one party over another. I'm being funded primarily by health foundations, interestingly, with some other private donations. And actually there are some other speakers here on the agenda today that I saw that are come from the same grant cohort, original grant cohort from the Kansas Health Foundation. 2 years ago, they funded roughly a dozen nonpartisan organizations in the state to do what they call integrated voter engagement work, or IVE for short, which is not a term I've heard, but really moving into the space where the folks who aren't traditionally thinking about voter engagement or politics can pull some of that info into their daily work. And so I think that's kind of interesting. Why do the health foundations care, and what is the issue? Approximately 50% of registered voters, so they've already been registered to vote, but they're not actually voting. The voters who do vote are older and whiter and wealthier than the population as a whole. The people with the poorest health outcomes are also the people who don't vote. So Justin touched on this in his presentation. This is correlation, not necessarily causation, but the populations overlap dramatically. So the people who don't vote are also the people with the poorest health outcomes in the state. You know, when I worked for Mayor Holland, one of his administrative priorities was health. And so I got to sit in on a lot of really powerful and important conversations happening in Wyandotte County, including with Jerry, who was then at the Community Health Council of Wyandotte County. And it really shaped how I think about the social determinants of health, and it's really impacting our health outcomes. And so I feel like this job that I'm in now is really a pretty cool intersection of these spaces and things that I care about. But we really believe that if we want a policy that reflects our communities, that we need to be, that the folks in our communities need to be voting at the rates that they're represent. What do you think of this meeting, Jerry? Compared to non-voters, people who vote are more likely to volunteer, stay informed, contact their elected officials, interact with their neighbors. Being a voter is associated with better health outcomes, reduced unemployment, and lower recidivism rates. We have elections in Kansas every year. They moved the spring elections, those local elections, from the spring to the fall just 2 years ago, so we now vote every August and every November. We had an election just a couple of weeks ago on Tuesday, November 5th. Approximately 19% of the registered population, of registered voters in Kansas voted. So 2 in 8. That does not count unregistered adults. Now it's hard to pinpoint the percentage of unregistered adults in the state, but we guess 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. It's hard to pinpoint because then you have to know the exact number of folks who are not eligible to vote, which includes undocumented populations. That number is really hard to really pin down. This is fairly average for Kansas turnout in local elections. The national average for a local election is about 24%, so we're low in terms of the national scene. If there were a silver bullet to getting more people to vote, we would have found it, I think, by now. But the problem is, if you have 8 in 10 people not voting, they're really not a monolith. And so there's not a single intervention or a single message that's motivating non-voters. Some people aren't voting because the process is tricky. I think it's legitimately hard to find out who's on your ballot, especially in these local races, and what they stand for. I think people don't like to do things that make them feel stupid. And so you get a ballot and it has a bunch of people you don't know on it, and you think you should know. And so maybe you stop or don't participate in that. Other people aren't voting because what they're seeing or what they know about politics is what they see on the national level. It all feels toxic. And so they feel like they need to fall down on one side or the other of this argument. They don't necessarily feel like they fit in one box or the other, and so they just disengage completely. The tactics that we use traditionally to talk to voters, I should have asked, do we have any elected officials in this room? How about anybody who's run for office or volunteered on a campaign before? Okay, we have a couple of campaign volunteers. Walk me back if I'm talking about stuff in the campaign world that doesn't make sense. Because I've been in it a while, so I get kind of in a bubble. When you think about political campaigns, you think about yard signs, you think about ads on social media, or that postcard you get in the mail. These all have a place in a traditional campaign, but they mostly work on people who already vote. So when we use these interventions in a controlled setting and tested for turnout, typically those on the top row would impact turnout by about a 0.5% increase to 1.5% increase tops. So you're flooding the market with these messages, but the people who are receiving them, especially if they're kind of passive, the people who are receiving them are people who are already engaged or looking for that information. If you have worked on a local campaign or you're running for a local office, you really have pretty limited resources to get the word out there. So like when I was working for the mayor, the maximum contribution limit is $500 a person. You have 6 or 8 months to really get the word out. Traditionally what campaigns do and political parties do are target the people who are already voting with their message. So we know in Kansas City, Kansas, for example, there are 10,000 people who vote in every school board race. And so the school board candidates were all targeting those 10,000 with their messages. Because if you know they're going to go, then they better know your name when they get there, right? But then what happens to the other 70,000 registered voters who aren't hearing the messages, but are probably the ones who need to hear the messages, right? So my next door neighbor, Lisa, was complaining to me in 2018, why did you get 12 pieces of candidate mail and I didn't get any? Well, Lisa, you don't vote, girl. So let's turn that around, but it is kind of a vicious cycle, because now you have the people who don't vote aren't getting the messages even though they need to hear them, right? Structural reforms, when we overlay those on top of an electorate, and I'm talking about like same-day voter registration or more options to vote early, these can have a bigger impact, and we will continue to work on these in Kansas. But really, we're only seeing increases of turnout up at 5 or 7%, which still doesn't feel like a lot. It is a lot when you're talking about voter turnout because the numbers are so hard to move. But it's not a ton when you think about 19% turnout to like 25% turnout, right? Making Election Day a holiday, for example, would be an example of a structural reform. And then if you put one of those structural reforms in, they really only work when you have a big coalition of people who are also invested in that reform and working to make it actually happen. The interventions that do work, actually having a conversation with somebody. So you have probably heard or seen campaigns that go door to door, or they phone bank and call you on the phone. Now when they do that, they traditionally see pretty solid effects from that work, but it's getting harder to do because fewer people are answering their doors and fewer people are answering their phones. So the phones make sense. In 2008, when you were calling someone on the phone, we saw nationally 20% of the time you could expect someone to answer. That number is now about 2%. At the door, in 2008, about 35% of the time you knocked on someone's door, they would answer, and now that number is 8% nationally. Now I know some of us will see higher rates when we're in our neighborhoods, but the number is dropping quickly. Anybody want to guess? The phone makes sense. Anybody want to guess or surmise about the door rate? Why aren't people answering their doors?
I don't know who it is.
I don't know who it is.
And you have to stand and talk on the porch phone. I mean, you have to do that because you don't want to let a stranger in your house.
Yeah.
Most people are communicating via their smartphones. They know who's going to show up at their house.
Right. Right. When you drive up to someone's house or you're heading over to a friend's house, normally you text them right before you get there. They're like, I'm leaving in 5 minutes. I was kind of confused about this, and it sort of, a light bulb went off for me recently. I was reading an article in the Washington Post about the industries that millennials have killed, and Kleenexes was an industry that millennials are killing. Because I don't buy boxes of Kleenex, I just pull toilet paper off the roll. Apparently that's pretty common, but it drives my parents nuts. But another industry they talked about was the doorbell, because we're all like moving to these rings, and we're texting each other when we get to their doors, and they interviewed some millennials in this article who said, I'm kind of scared when the doorbell rings. It's sort of jarring, and then I know it's a stranger. I know it's not someone I know, or else they would have told me they were coming over. So fewer people are answering their doors, and we're having fewer and fewer opportunities to actually talk to people face-to-face. We know that face-to-face conversation is powerful. We know hearing specifically from someone you know and trust is powerful. This is not a new concept. Relational organizing is the fancy term. The civil rights movement was a relational organizing movement. This isn't new. What's new is taking a relational organizing movement to scale in terms of trying to increase voter turnout and then targeting your efforts and tracking your efforts. And so I'm going to show you a program that we started to try to do that. Some other things that increase voter turnout that I have less impact on personally, but civic education, K-12 civic education can really make an impact on whether or not you're going to vote. Having a really sexy race might change turnout, or a lot of visibility around a race might change turnout. Why is this important for the faith community and for your congregations? Because nonprofits and congregations serve as these trusted messengers. Justin spoke to it. You'll hear about it throughout the day, but we're just being bombarded by these messages in our social media feeds and on the television, and we've seen those studies about how fewer people are trusting the institutions and organizations around them and the messenger, and so these nonprofits and congregations can serve as trusted messengers for people who are kind of worried about where their information is coming from. You have a built-in network. Like I said earlier, political candidates and parties aren't talking to people who don't vote, and so in order to engage these populations of people over time, we have to build in the infrastructure to do that, and I think congregations are a good spot for that. Nonpartisan doesn't have to mean non-participation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're asking our volunteers and our organizational partners to ask the people they serve and the people they talk to vote, and not who to vote for. And I think that is becoming more acceptable. I think just in the last couple of years, we've seen more companies and more health foundations and more churches ready to jump into the space of civic engagement where it used to be maybe a little taboo, and I'm excited about that change. I don't think we get to increase voter turnout unless we're hearing it in the places where we live and work and play, but it's important. Okay, so we created this project called Voter to Voter. It's hard for me not to call it a pyramid scheme, but people around me really don't like it when I do that. We're recruiting teams of people, teams of volunteers, who are committed to asking their friends to vote. Not a lot of friends, just 5 or 10. We launched in 2018, and it worked really well, but I'll show it to you. I'll use these terms, so let me explain them. Because I think especially that term ambassador gets confusing. But a team might be a church or a congregation, it might be a health clinic, it might be a group of colleagues that come together, it might be just your friends and family who say we're going to do this together, we think this is important and we value this. So we have informal teams and formal teams. The ambassadors on those teams are just anybody and everybody who makes up that team. So any volunteer we call an ambassador. And then the people you contact or connect with, or our volunteers contact or connect with, we call your friends or your voters, and sort of use that interchangeably. I want to go back one. If you registered to vote, that's public record. Do you all know that? So if you went to your county election office and dropped $30, they would print out a list for you of every registered voter in the county. And the address they put on their voter registration form, and a little bit more information about them, including whether or not they vote. Not who they vote for, just whether or not they participate in elections. So when I said, your local candidate running for the mayor, running to be the mayor of Salina, you know that 10,000 people are voting all the time. You would go to the election office and pull that list to find that 10,000. That's how these candidates work this. The political parties take these files and work them into software to more easily manipulate that data. So if you're working for a political party or a candidate, you could run a list, say, of everyone who lived between Seneca and Washington, 1st and 7th, has voted all four of the last 4 elections, is between the ages of 18 and 35, and is a Scorpio. Okay? I don't know why you want to talk to Scorpios. But that data is public information, and it's powerful. It's how elected officials and campaigns are choosing who they talk to and who they target. We also think it's powerful, and so wanted to give more people access to that data. If you were a congregation, though, and you wanted to impact voter turnout within your congregation or within your networks, coming by that data is actually pretty hard unless you're tied to a party or a political campaign. And I already said, I think we need to be in churches and in health clinics and in schools and in the places where people live, work, and play if we're going to really reach underrepresented populations. So our idea is that we share that data as far and wide as we can and make that more easily accessible. So we built this tool to help keep our organizations accountable and to help you do the kind of smarter voter engagement that campaigns and political parties are traditionally doing. We built a tool, we call it Voter to Voter. You can put a friend in, and it will tell you whether or not that friend is voting. So we give them a score. It sounds creepy, but bear with me for a second. We give them a score. It's a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's essentially just how many of the last 4 elections did you vote in. You get a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Let me show you what those 4 elections are. This changes every year, but right now we pick 4 different types of elections. So we pick midterm. The last midterm in Kansas had 56% turnout. If you remember last year, we had record voter turnout across the country. So 56% in midterm is actually a record high. Sounds kind of sad. We picked a primary election. We picked a city election, school board election, which is hovers around 17 or 19% in Kansas. We picked a presidential election. Turnout in the last Kansas presidential election was 67%. So the broad stroke theory is if you're a 1 of 4 voter, you would have voted, we would assume you voted in that presidential election, and then you don't come out for other races. Does that make sense? If you're a 2 of 4 voter, maybe you vote every other November in an even year, but you aren't coming out when there's a school board race on the ballot. So that's kind of a broad assumption. It's not a perfect science. If you're a young person, for example, you won't have had the opportunity to vote in all these elections, so your score might be low even though your enthusiasm is high. Your voting history doesn't follow you across the state line. So if you moved from Nebraska and you were voting every time there, you might show up as a 0 or 4 in our system. And then we say, try to find the folks in your network or in your congregations who aren't voting very regularly and make an extra effort. And so, for reference, out of all registered voters in Kansas, 24% of them will be a 0 or a 4, or a 0 out of 4. Isn't that stunning? 24% will have not voted in any of those elections. Another 19% will have only voted in 1. Only 12% of the population, registered population, has voted in all 4 of those. So if you're looking up your friends and there are 4 or 4, I say recruit them to do this effort because they're political dorks like me. Okay. Anybody want to admit they didn't vote in this last local election? You want to, why do you think? What was your biggest barrier, you think?
I was out of town and we didn't get the mail-in vote in time.
I forgot. Yeah. I found a lot of teams kind of coming on had some exciting candidates at the top of the ticket in 2018. I had a much harder time getting people pumped up for these local elections in 2019 because the message became more about the importance of voting itself versus voting for a candidate or against a candidate. And so that was kind of trickier. I think the heavy lift for me this year will be kind of harnessing the energy of 2020. We know a lot of folks will turn out to vote because it's a highly contested presidential election, and a lot of people will be excited about asking their friends to vote and harnessing that for work in 2021. One thing that we launched last year, just in October actually, this year, sorry, it's running by so quickly it feels like years when it tweaks. We launched in October this tool called ksballot.org to try to remove the barrier of I don't know what's on the ballot, which is actually legitimately hard. So this project works statewide, but I had folks asking me and teams asking me in different parts of the state, like how do we send out a sample ballot to our friends? And then I'm digging through county election office websites, and some of them are better than others. The Secretary of State in a local election doesn't really aggregate that data, and so we built this tool, or Congress got the development of this tool. It's not live right this second, but it will be live again for 2020. But you stick in your address, and everybody on the ballot pops up. Mind-blowing, huh? Then you can click on, say Jerry's running for school board, you can click on Jerry's profile, and it will link right out to his Facebook page, and it will link right out to his website. And then his bio and some kind of talking points about where he stands on issues will be on that profile page as well. It has a really cool tool in it that helps you make a plan to vote. So you can click on the make a plan, and it will show you all the places you can vote early. It will help you get your mail-in ballot in, or you can even pop out a little calendar invite, stick it on your calendar if you're super OCD about your calendar like I am. And so we launched that this year. Let me tell you about how this worked in 2018. I don't have 2019 data yet, so I'm going to show you the tool in a second, some cool things that we do in the tool. We get updates every day from the Secretary of State's office about who's voting early. So if you were in the tool and you put your friends in, it would show you who voted early and who hadn't, and then you could come in the day before Election Day and say, okay, everybody on my list has voted except David. I really need to come back around on David. We don't get Election Day data until about 6 weeks later. So it's the most anticlimactic part of this program. But so I don't have 2019 data yet, but I have this 2018 data. Last year we were talking to 5,500 voters. You'll notice we do have some congregational partners up there. I don't have everybody listed. We had a team at Congregation Beth Torah. We have a team at St. Andrew Christian Church, the Heartland Presbytery, which covers sort of northeast Kansas and northwest Missouri, has been a really big partner of ours. Last year, we launched in the summer. By November, we were talking to about 5,500 voters. In the primary election, so last August, of the voters we talked to, 60% of them voted compared to 27% statewide. More exciting, though, is that next number, 41% of the zeros we talked to actually turned out to vote, compared to 4% statewide. Isn't that stunning? Now, you would think maybe in November those results would be less exciting because turnout was higher, but they were actually still pretty exciting. 82% of the people we talked to voted compared to 56% statewide. And 66% of the zeros we talked to voted compared to 20% statewide. Now, because we just went through an election, I pulled out all sorts of slides about how we actually execute the program when we're in it. But the short story is, if you signed up to be an ambassador on a team, we would email you once a week for the last 6 weeks before an election with nonpartisan information about who's on the ballot, where to go vote, maybe we'll put sample scripts in there for how you can talk to your friends about voting or talk to people in your congregation about voting, sample text messages, and then we say just make some individual contact with the people that you have pulled in and committed to talking to. I don't want you to talk to people you don't like. Defeats the purpose of peer-to-peer organizing. I want you to talk to people you know and trust, and remind them that there's an election coming up, and we kind of walk you through that so we don't leave you hanging. But everything I send out, and we send out is nonpartisan. Let me show you the tool. What kind of questions do we have so far? We surveyed our ambassadors after 2018 and asked what was the hardest part of this project. And number 2 was, just finding time to add something new to the list, right? Like, I'm already doing so much, and we're all stretched thin and over-engaged. Like, finding these 5 people and then making the time in my schedule to talk to them about voting was hard. But then the number 1 answer was kind of this fear of having a political conversation with someone who you don't normally have a political conversation with, or who you're not talking to politics about regularly. I live this and breathe this every day, and there's still all sorts of people in my life I don't normally have political conversations with, even though they know I do it for a living. I think one of the nice things about this project is that we have built a community with our ambassadors to share ideas about what's working and the conversations that we're having with the folks in our networks. And a lot of our volunteers said, just using the tool and the information you sent as like I'm providing a service made for a really easy frame for that conversation. So especially in these local elections when people don't know they're coming, if you think 80% of registered voters didn't vote 3 weeks ago, most people are not thinking about these elections day in and day out, and like getting a reminder from someone they know and trust is not going to bother them. Even if it's a reminder about voting, most of our respondents said they didn't feel like that was a political overstep, especially if it was coming from their friends. And so I think using the tools too that we have provided, like KS Ballot, like that online ballot guide, and just saying like, hey, I came across this really cool tool, and there's an election next week, and I wanted you to see it, can be really a nice conversation starter too. Okay, here's the tool, voter2voter.org. If you click this join now, we have a whole list of teams here. Alliance for Healthy Kansas, I saw Spencer here today. Moore Square, Marcus is my team leader. Hi, Marcus.
Hey, Lindsey.
We have a team at the Community Health Council where Jerry used to work. I like this team, personally I like this team called Vote Like a Mother. It's right below Vote Damn It. So we have all sorts of teams made up of all different kinds of things. Now, an important distinction, I think, because most people have this question at the end of this presentation. Everything that I do and send out is nonpartisan, but I know a lot of people are coming to me with maybe a partisan angle or with an issue that they're kind of feeling worked up about or is really central to their mission. And we understand that, and so we allow for partisan teams or political teams or candidate teams, but you should know that I would open it to anybody. So if Governor Laura Kelly had come to me last year and said, I want a voter-to-voter team, and then Chris Kobach had come to me and said, I want a voter-to-voter team, I would have created teams for both of them, right? If you wanted to join one of these teams, you could click on it. And log in right there. I'm already logged in, so it won't show you. If you wanted to create a new team, there's a form right here, and it comes right to my email. So if you wanted to start a team within your organization, you could. Another important thing to note, when you sign up, we're asking for your contact information so that we can email the volunteer this information and include you in this community of folks talking to their friends about voting. you are going to list them in a dashboard like this, and I'll show you this dashboard, and connect them to their voter record. And we use that to track this voter turnout over time and get those 82% numbers that I showed you. But we're not asking for their phone numbers, for their emails. We're not talking to that end voter because we think that defeats the purpose. So, I might know or guess the message that's motivating David, who lives in Hutchinson, to go vote. I might be able to guess at the right motivational message to move him to vote. But is he going to hear it from me, like someone who lives in Kansas City, Kansas, and doesn't really intimately know his issues? Our theory is no, that you are the best person to know what barriers your friends and networks are facing and the issues that will motivate them to action. And so we're not talking to that final voter. I'm going to add a new contact in here. Sometimes I ask for volunteers and then they're not perfect voters and they get mad at me. So if someone wants to volunteer, you can, or I'll put myself in. I'm going to add a new contact. You need to know their name and city. It's in alphabetical order. Okay, so David's here. I'm going to click the see if they're registered to vote button. Search for matching voting records. There are a couple David Jordans in Hutchinson. Which street do you live on?
That 40-year-old.
Okay, then you click this is them. I know that's funky grammar, just roll with it. Okay, so now David is on my dashboard, and we get, you're a 404 voter. Nice work. That voter propensity score of 404 will show you how frequently he's voting. We say 404s don't really need your help. Your 104s and 204s, your 004s and 104s are going to need a little bit extra work. Not a lot, but some kind of individual ask. So like when I was working for Mark Cullen, in 2017 he ran for re-election. Spoiler alert, we lost. But I signed up all 4 of my next door neighbors to vote by mail. And when I started this project, I went and looked, and only 1 of the 4 had actually turned it in. And I was kind of shocked because I thought they knew how important this election was to me. But when I looked at their voting history, none of them had ever voted. Like they're in their mid-30s, smart, engaged people, but they hadn't voted in even the presidential election. So this time I went a little further and signed them up to vote by mail. And then our dashboards will show you, your dashboard will show you if they actually requested an advance ballot. So I texted them when they got it, and I said, do you have your ballot, and do you have any questions? And I'm going to my mailbox tomorrow, can I go to your mailbox tomorrow? So I was literally like moving their ballots to the mailbox, which sounds kind of tedious, but sometimes that's what it takes. I am of the mind that sometimes you just need to get people over the hump and kind of break down that intimidation factor. Now I would love it if my next door neighbor Lisa would internalize her own motivations for voting. I don't tell Lisa I'm using her as an example. But she isn't quite there yet, and we've been through now 2 or 3 elections of this. She was really excited about 2018. I thought I had her hooked, and then it was really hard to move her in these local elections and get her to even participate. And so sometimes I feel like just getting them in the habit and breaking down that intimidation factor can help create healthy habits moving forward. If you have young folks in your network, or you have access to youth groups, or you have kids or grandkids of high school or college age, encouraging them to vote can create lifelong habits. We know that if you reach the age of 30 and you haven't voted, there's a 90% chance you never will. I think people, once they get to that point, and you've never done it, you just sort of internalize the fact that you're a non-voter. You identify as a non-voter, or just it's like something that's not something that I do. And so it becomes a little bit harder. Now, I'm making it sound like you're going to have to drag your friends kicking and screaming to the polls, but most of my volunteers said in 2018, they only had 1 or 2 conversations with someone someone. The majority of them were via text, although right after that came email, and so it was a one-on-one contact, but it was just one or two of them. If you think we had 82% turnout with that, it doesn't sound like it was actually that tough a lift for most of our volunteers. The other things you have here, that VBM stands for vote by mail. So that's what I was saying. If someone requests an advance ballot in the mail, that little button will turn green on the back end, and then if they turn it in early, that little button will turn green. So Mary didn't request an advance ballot, but voted on election day in the primary. Then we have the same thing in the general, and again, we don't have election day data yet for the general, so we don't know. Yeah.
So that says it's not available in this area. I just typed in my phone, my address.
On KS
And
ballot
it
or on
says,
voter to voter?
on voter to voter, it says, we're sorry, this voter guide is not available in your area. So is that not in Salina?
I think were you going,
On that
were you
voter,
putting your address in there?
yeah.
That links straight out to that ballot guide that I was talking about.
Oh,
And
okay.
we turned that off right after election day, and we'll turn it back on in a couple of months.
Okay, thank you.
One other part of this tool I think is really cool is that as a team, you have access to all your own data. So if you had a team, you have these lists you can pop out and export. And so Village Presbyterian Church could say at the end of this, we talked to 200 people and 85% of them voted and 40% of them had never voted before. And then they have their own story to tell out of this data, which I think is pretty powerful, especially for our nonprofit partners and folks who are trying to push out the work that they're doing. What questions do we have about this? Do you like it? Do you think it's creepy? Marcus, do you think it's creepy?
I mean, would there be interest in starting teams at your congregations if there was support provided? Can you talk a little bit more about the support that you guys provide to some of the congregations where this might not be natural? Because I saw you work with Asbury and some others.
Yeah, so we ask all of our teams to designate a team leader. I don't right now have a team leader manual, but I'm working on one and should be done soon. Our team leaders said they were doing about, they probably did 4 hours of work total for the election cycle. That's what most of my team leaders averaged, although some did some really intense work. But mostly I just want another layer of relational contact in this project. I think it's the only way that we actually scale. So that if I call Jerry and he met me once at this conference in Salina and signed up for this, like you may or may not respond to my call. But if your team leader calls you, I think that adds that level of relational contact that's really important. You know, I sort of think about this tool as like the Fitbit for voter turnout. We all know that like tracking what you're doing makes you accountable. And so we all walk more steps when we're wearing Fitbits because you can actually see the number. I think like having a team leader know if your team leader will also know if your voters go to vote. So they'll be able to come in and say, okay, Marcus, I see that Jonathan hasn't voted yet. Have you had a chance to talk to him? Was he receptive? Does he need anything, or can we do anything to help? Like just having that extra layer is helpful. If you signed up, we do host an hour-long webinar training once a week. And so this does work statewide. I can come in person and do a training, or a member of our staff can come in person and do a training. But we can also do them instead of a webinar call if that's easier. Then we have some team leader forums in additional to those trainings. We do a conference call about once a week for the last 2 months of the election, so we're all in contact with each other. And then we send out how to getting started guide for your volunteers. We're working on a more robust toolkit for 2020 that might include more social media graphics and content for your email newsletters and things like that. voter-to-voter.org. I have a handout. You could send me a note today if you want it, and I'll just sit here and do it, or I can make you sign on my sign-up sheet.
And the ballot question is going to be dead for anyone because there's no active ballots, which is why it would just say the ballot's not available.
What other questions do we have?
Unfortunately, this is just Kansas right now, right?
The tool just works in Kansas. I mean, the concept works everywhere. This tracking tool is Kansas specific. We're looking to make some pretty serious upgrades to the tool in the next couple of months. I normally get down in the weeds talking about all the things I'd love for this tool to do, and that's not very helpful for you because it doesn't do them yet. And you're just mad at me that they don't exist yet. But I'm talking to some folks that do this nationally. There are not very many. You'll see a lot of these tools pop up around the 2020 election. I didn't talk about this. I said we know relational organizing works. One of the reasons we know it's working in a political context is that there are a lot of studies being done at the national level and interventions being tested in controlled environments on the ground. And so those tests really have been happening in the last couple of years only, 2014, 2016. Marcus and I both sat in on a training where some of these national organizers came and presented this concept for the first time. Get 10 of your friends to vote and build these teams and kind of scale up. And the national studies are showing increases of 7 to 15% turnout. Increases in turnout. Ours were higher than that, but we were pretty small. It'll be interesting to see if we have the same kind of turnout as we scale. But some of these national organizations I'm talking to.
In Nebraska, we have an organization called Civic Nebraska.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of emphasis on being able to talk about things that are going to be voted on and do it in a civil, friendly way.
Yeah.
And then extending that, now it's time to go and vote.
Right. You know, I'm glad you said that. There are actually 23 states that have these civic engagement tables, or they call them organizing tables. Kansas is not one of them, but usually there's a backbone organization that provides information to partners who are interested about different ways to be engaged and to participate. And so, you know, we're looking at how do we move our ambassadors sort of up the ladder so maybe they're engaging with their legislators, etc. But Nebraska is one of these, and we're working on that in Kansas. One of the things you'll see next year, most of these tools that pop up are partisan. Most of them are pay to play. So a lot of them will scrape your contact list out of your phone and say, okay, contact Marcia because she lives in District 3 and that's a swing district, often paid for by a candidate at the top of the ticket and then disseminated among volunteers. You will see those. If you didn't see them last election cycle, you'll see a ton of them in 2020. But again, we think this data is powerful and should be available to anybody who wants to get out the vote. And that we need to be nonpartisan if we're really going to reach the people embedded in our communities. What would you say?
I was just asked just so it doesn't seem, get this in the years, but for you may have said this before, what's the average number for the average team, what's the average number of members per team, and what's the average number of contacts they pledge to reach out to?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I've looked at the average lately. We originally pitched try to find 10 volunteers on your team, and then each volunteer talk to 10 people. It was a bit arbitrary. The presentation that Marcus and I went to, they were talking to 25, they were asking people to do 25 contacts, and that felt out of reach to me. I think for some, 10 is still out of reach, but we've been kind of pushing toward 10 and 10 because it's a nice round.
So some teams are small, maybe 3 people on a team.
Right, we have some teams that sign up that are just like, Jerry decides to do this and invites David to do it with him, and they create a team, and it's the 2 of them. We have some small teams, we have some very large teams, we have a League of Women Voters, a couple of League of Women Voters teams, and they just created a statewide team on Saturday. So we have some very large and some very small. We had some volunteers put lots and lots and lots of voters on their dashboards, and that made me kind of nervous because it feels like you're getting away from the ability to do personal contact when you have that many people on your list. But the people who have done that so far, at least in my program, their turnout rates were as good as the people who only had 3 voters on their list. So really, it's just that commitment to actually having some kind of direct conversation with somebody. Intentional engagement, just like we heard from Justin. Well, thank you for having me. I will sit here for a second to take questions, or if you want to kind of look up at the database. We still have 5 minutes before lunch, but maybe you could be the first ones in line. Thank you for that later.
That was a presentation by Lindsey Behgam on voter engagement. You're watching Salina Media Connection.